Well, we've got a doozy for you here. The next presenter is no stranger to the stage of the JNUC. He's done a lot of presentations in the past. You may recognize him as one of the many masterminds behind the Mac Brained organization, which is the online and in real life Mac community. You can go to macbrained.org to learn more about that, but I'll let Andrew tell you more about what he's got going on with the next session. Without further ado, Mr. Andrew Segal.
Thank you, Sam. So, how about this stage? Isn't this pretty cool? We were looking at out back. It's pretty awesome. I also did want to whittle in the rocking chair. I thought that would be kind of cool, but that could take a while, and I have like 15 minutes of content, so we gotta buffer this. Also very happy that this is obviously not a dream because I am wearing pants. So I think we're all happy about that. I know I am. All right, so let's get into this. This is me, Andrew Segal, president of MacBrained, day job, senior systems management engineer. It's a mouthful, but infrastructure. I deal a lot with deployment techniques, infrastructure, overall health, that fun stuff. This is a little bit about me. Yeah, everybody has a lot of things that they're into, so I figured it nice little slide here, show father, husband, active member of the PTA, site council, attempting to tell my wife no. Doesn't really work very well for I think anyone here in this room, but definitely not so good for me either. Briefly touch on the concept of my environment so you get a better context of why we would have to go down the route that we went. So we have a very large central infrastructure, multiple servers behind a load balancer, NFS storage, and that's the core infrastructure, but that's not in all the regions across the world, right? That's only in the main office. In all the regions, all around the world, we've deployed out Mac Minis, actually, 2 of them. I've talked at great length in other presentations about this, so this isn't really what we're going to go into, but just the concept is across the globe in more countries and cities than I can name off, we have distribution points. So that brings us to the problem, right? When I first started drafting what this presentation was going to be and how we were going to present it, I thought that it would be a pretty good idea to break it down. We have, what's the problem? Okay, which then gives you your question, and then how did we solve that problem? So this all kind of came from the concept of, is my environment healthy? And by my environment, in this case, I was talking about my servers across the globe. It'd been a long time. Are they replicating correctly? What packages are where? Are they all configured the same? Are they patched? What version is the server at? What version is the OS? And these are all important things to know. And because of what we figured out, each and every single one of these Mac Minis through the years had been hand-built, either by myself at some points in time, predecessors. We all had a certain amount of feature set that every single server we wanted to have, but it doesn't mean that we knew absolutely that everything was set up the same way. So that's a problem. The nice thing, like not at all, was the fact that we had no monitoring really. The monitoring infrastructure that we have is not really made for Macs. It's more Linux, Windows. Service is a port active, is it not? But that's not really down to the deep. Are my servers healthy? Are they patched themselves? And funny, took me quite some time and looking on how do we start automating the provisioning of these things, how do we check this, how do we check that, and I was really thinking about it for quite a few days, and stuck in traffic, which is, your captive thought place where you're just sitting there, bumper to bumper, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. It hit me. I do know how to manage Macs. We have the technology, we have the capability, we have the power. We know how to manage Macs. Most of my infrastructure is Mac. So why don't I move forward with managing Casper with Casper? So right there, infrastructure is mostly Mac. That's why this absolutely works well for us. Another pro to that, IT operations. They are already really comfortable with Jamf. We sent them to training. They know how to use, deploy policies, packages, extension attributes, all of these wonderful things. Very familiar with the API. We do a lot with the API, not as much as some people, but we're definitely, it's our go-to if we can't access a feature directly, maybe through the GUI of the JSS, script against it. You'd have vendor support, right? You have somebody to pick up. And an overall familiarity with the tool itself. So, with that, there's some other things to consider once you start going down that route, right? Okay, I'm going to use the JSS. I'm going to use my production JSS. And the more that I went down that route, the more that it was very, very apparent that I absolutely was not going to do that. Because you want a totally different set of admins, set of extension attributes, and in the end, one JSS to rule them all is not necessarily the best. I don't care what Frodo says, you need more than one. In this case, so why is separate JSS? Why would we have to go down this route, okay? So unique extension attributes, I touched on those. You want to know totally different things about a server than I want to know about my clients. I don't care, hope actually that the clients don't have a server app, but if they do, I definitely don't care what version it is. Don't care if SUS is configured properly. Don't care where they're replicating from. All these different things that go down. Also then policies. Your policies are going to be very, very different, as I've found through this process, if you're going to be deploying to a group of servers versus your clients. And your methodologies will change, and the admins controlling it. So that leads us to really endless possibilities. It was actually really exciting once we started figuring out what could we do with this concept, right? You could start setting yourselves up with policies and using the dashboard and getting live feedback, whether or not Reposado had run correctly. We had other things up there, setting the DNS domains. Sky's the limit on what you can start doing and what you can start feeding back. You want to see a dashboard of which computers are which OS, which ones have software updates, all these things that maybe you don't manage so tightly on your clients, and maybe you do. But once you get to servers and standardizing that environment, you really want to know this information because it's actionable. You can start going through and creating extension attributes like I did. For the entire process of getting this started, every single time that I had a question about a server or some health point on the server, I'd write an extension attribute. That way, I wasn't getting the feedback on just one server, but I was getting the feedback on many servers. And there was a lot of different things we saw there. And if you look at this is an actual screenshot. Things are a lot different, right? You can instantly see that this is not really standardized. This is all over the place. Certain things have certain things. But you can start leveraging the power of the default inventory display set to really give yourself a dashboard with more information here, not necessarily just a pie graph, but now your all computer inventory turns into an instant scan down, see what's going on in your environment. It really, really empowers you. Things with policies, have them up there. Being able to deploy out combo updates, force software updates to run on the server OS. Being able to schedule those because you can schedule policies, right? So you could easily set it up so that all across the world at exactly midnight, their time, which would be the least impacting to users whatsoever, you will install an update and restart that server. And now you can automate that. And for me, and having servers all over the world, that's powerful because that means that once you're comfortable enough and you've tested things enough, you know that this can happen while you're asleep. You can still be proactively maintaining things with very minimal effort because most people, I think, here know how to use the JSS. So you instantly are capable of really powerful things. So even so far as a OS upgrade, set it, cache it, have it run at midnight, come back up. Now, granted, we have some resiliency in that because in every single region we have 2 Mac Minis, so there's always a complete failover. They're always replicating to each other, so if one would go down, don't worry, the service will still stay back up. But you're capable now of doing these things. Turning repo sync for Reposado, setting that on a policy and having the logs up in the JSS so that now you can access these logs, you can see across the board, hey, this failed, this command says that it failed, why did this command say that it failed? Go in, have all the logs right there in your JSS. Granted, you can do this with other solutions as well. Graylog 2 is a really good freeware one. Splunk is an awesome tool for this. But in this case, my infrastructure is the JSS and all of its distribution points. So being able to leverage my tool to do this for me and in a format that my operations staff's already trained to understand was really, really important and a definite win when it came to management. The other super powerful thing behind this, and kind of the reason why I ended up going down this route, is the concept of deploying and automating the deployment of these distribution points. So you end up with essentially a workflow that is really simple. Depending on the region of the world, I could have, and have had this happen, I could have a VP in Dubai walk in with a Mac, decide that he's now a Mac user, have no other Mac users in Dubai, and no infrastructure. And now I can have local IT provision a distribution point for me with no understanding really of the Mac platform whatsoever. So the workflow that I had set up, let's say, however this Mac walks into the environment, say, they went to the Apple Store, told local IT, go to the Apple Store, just get 2 Mac Minis like this, plug them in, run the quick add package, so now they're enrolled into my JDS Medic, as I think we're calling it now. I'm trying to come up with a name. It's kind of confusing when you start mixing your JSS and your JDS, and then infrastructure folks are looking at you like you're crazy, and DNS names get funny, but get it enrolled, and then what we're now empowered to do is now what I've set up is drop-down extension attributes within the JSS computer object so that we can set where we want things to replicate from, which JSS we want this distribution point to be a part of. In our environment, we have 3. We have our sandpit test environment, which is not change controlled, and engineering has full control over. We have our development environment, that is change controlled, and then we have production. So it was important that this mechanism was able to provision these things on the fly in each environment, whether it be test, dev, prod. So I have those as drop-down menus, and also have then the replication points. Where do I want this to come from? Where do I want it to grab its software updates? Do I want to have, Mexico City grab it from, I don't know, Sao Paulo or something like that, and just because network infrastructure, it makes sense and it's a quicker path, or do I want it to go all the way back to Denver? As an engineer, I can set these things ahead of time in these objects. And then all it takes is either local staff or remoting into that system and running a self-service policy that I had set up. So the self-service policy that I set up to do this task checks those extension attributes via the API, brings them into the script, already has the JDS installer, configures the Samba share, configures the Samba user, sets up Reposado based on those extension attributes already, loads that distribution point up in the API of the destination JSS, and then installs the JDS as a replication mechanism. And now what you have, and the end result from that, is a cookie cutter JSS distribution point, JDS, software update server that's identical, reproducible, it's automated. The concept behind this was, what do most of us do? And I think it was brought up even at the keynote. The whole reason for Casper coming about was trying to automate themselves, not necessarily out of a job, but out of the tasks they didn't want to do. So that's always beneficial, but also is the quality of always having a reproducible recipe and the confidence that all it takes is a single click and you've already pre-populated everything exactly the way that you want it. It's been really beneficial, very, very powerful stuff. With that, and actually using the same framework and the same script and the same drop-down extension attributes, we're able to also standardize all those distribution points worldwide, find the Casper share, move it to the directory that you want it. Simple things, housekeeping things, but making sure that across the board, everything is exactly the same as much as it can be, because once you start doing that, then things start popping out, right? Then you can start seeing all the issues because something's different. Or in some cases, what you can also do, workflow that we're working on, and it's not because it doesn't work, but it's because HPSM is troublesome at times. I don't know if anybody here has to use HPSM. Every ticketing system everybody complains about. I mean, that's just the way that it works, right? But at any rate, you can have it set up so that your smart groups, let's say smart status is dying for your hard drive, computer ends up in that smart group, and now you're sent an email to a ticket list that routes an on-site technician to then go and either swap out that computer, that Mac Mini, or swap out the drive. And if they have to swap it out, we can use this process to now recreate a distribution point and just have it replicate off of the one right next to it. The process with that was just the same as getting your Mac Mini off the shelf. Yeah. Enroll the system, set up the extension attributes, run the policy in self-service, and now you have yourself a JDS. So all these things have been really, really cool. Really cool. Another obligatory genie. Thank you. You're too kind. I'm just talking about distribution points. But there's other concepts of what you can do now, right? So now you have a dashboard, and let's say there's lots of dashboards out there. There's all kinds of things that you can use. In this case, it's preferable to leverage the JSS because we already have the infrastructure, we have the licensing, we have the individuals. But you can take this concept a little bit farther. You can make computer objects in the JSS. You can update those computer objects from shell scripts off of Linux servers and have them post directly their status up to the API. Mike Morales has a couple scripts that he has posted in his Git repo. One of them downloads all the scripts on a JSS, another one downloads all the extension attributes via the API. Really powerful stuff once you can start doing that. Really, really powerful stuff. All right. Plug a little bit about MacBrained. So MacBrained is a group. Right now, we're based out of San Francisco. We're working with the Minneapolis Mac admins and the London Mac admins group, seeing what we can do about creating out some chapters. I think that would be really awesome. And empowering the community to get together, swap knowledge. Look us up. And let's do our Q&A. And while we're doing our QA, I'm going to leave up great resources. Just for any of you that have not gone to these websites, absolutely go. Rich Troughton, wealth of information. Charles Edge up there, Cryptid, always awesome. A lot of the workflows I was talking about extensively use Cocoa Dialog as an interaction point with users, and in this case, with technicians. Okay? So, questions?
You said that you were adding the servers through a quick add package. Is there a way you could potentially do it with DEP?
His question was, I said that I was adding servers in with a quick add package. Could I use that with DEP? Yeah, I don't see why not. Well, you could figure out a workflow for that. You would, yeah, as long as they're enrolled.
If your local admin went down to the Apple Store and picked it up retail.
Yeah, you'd lose the concept of being able to go down to the Apple Store and just pick up a piece of hardware. That's not really a super common way for something to walk in the door, but it does happen, and you can't do that. It has to be already set up with the vendors that you're purchasing the device from. But let's say that did happen, then yeah, theoretically we could.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Are you leveraging the server app on your Mac server? Like, are you leveraging, do your server, do you actually run server app and all of that, where you just,
Yeah.
so the upgrades for that is interesting.
Yeah. So the upgrades for those are going to be interesting, right? His question was, are we leveraging the server app on our Mac Minis, and does that then make upgrades more interesting? Because as a very leading question, he knows what Rich and myself and a couple others in this room, I'm sure, have found out is that you cannot automate the deployment of the server.app. That's where there does take some actual hands-on in my workflow. I have it so that it launches the server app, but you actually do have to have a human being to click on that and approve and configure that, or at least allow the server app to get all the way to its screen and then quit the server app, and then you can resume configuring it and setting up users and file shares and stuff. So, thank you. Rich? Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's actually, I have a bit of a follow-up on that. So at this past WWDC, I actually found the folks who do the server.app, and I asked them why. They said, well, you need to click on the license. I said, that's it? They said, yeah, we need you to click on the license. I said, you know, for Xcode, you built in a command line way of accepting the license. They said, yeah, we did do that, didn't we?
Yeah.
So I would say if you want to be able to do server.app entirely for the command line, talk to your SEs, give them the impact data, let them know exactly how much you want this, because apparently this is the yearly debate within Apple for this small group that does server.app, whether or not they should make this fully automatable from the command line. So let them know that yes, you do want that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so for the video, what Rich was saying was that unlike the Xcode, which Xcode allows you to run a command to accept the EULA on behalf of the user when you deploy it, the server.app does not. And that's something that should absolutely be a feature request with your SE. There's also provide feedback, I believe, from the help menu that'll go to the teams responsible. Make sure you file these things. It's really important that if we're sitting around and we're like, why in the world is it this way, that you file that bug. That you do either file a feature request, a bug, provide feedback. Most of the Apple apps do have a way within the help menu to provide feedback. Do it. Any other, yep.
I've got one question and one follow-up. I'll do the follow-up first. I did my own digging into that because I had my own bash script that built Mac mini servers on the management course in my previous environment. I found the server.app when you first run it is doing some really deep hooks into the kernel. It's doing a lot of Mac OS stuff, so that's probably why that's there. I've never found a way around it, but as you said, some feedback would be good. My question is, when you come to your server monitoring, server.app actually implements SNMP, and I was just wondering why you didn't seem to be using that, because that's a pretty industry standard.
Yeah. So what his question was why are we not implementing SNMP? Because that is part of the server app. And that's just simply because the infrastructure that handles the monitoring is separate from us. And that wasn't something that on the network monitoring operations team, something they were comfortable in using on a Mac. The environment, especially production, it's considered qualified, certified, and so there's a lot of, not to say that paperwork's getting in the way, but there's some politics there that would have to go through to allow that to happen, which we have some exceptions for to even have the Macs in there. So that's why. So not necessarily a great reason why, but that's why. The other thing that he had mentioned was that the server app, once it's booted, does a lot of changes, looks at the system, it does a lot of deep changes to turn that operating system into a server OS. So that would be one reason, in his opinion, that Apple wants you to go ahead and actually click that button. Any other questions? Sir?
How do you make a distinction between what nodes go on your primary JSS and which ones you put on the secondary? Is it just your JSS infrastructure, or are there other systems that you decided to move over?
Right. So what's the distinction of what you decide to be put on the one JSS versus the monitoring health deployment style JSS? So the distinction right now is distribution points. Like it's just strictly distribution points. And then deciding which environment those are enrolled into, that's purely based on function, right? Is this an engineering sandpit device that we want to, let's say, spin up in Europe? We want to make sure that the engineers in Europe have a distribution point, SUS server that they can get in and change, or to qualify this process, because all of this process has to go through a test. We have a lot of change paperwork, so you have to document exactly how everything's going to be done, and then someone else other than you has to then do an SQA on that and ensure that every time that this process happens, that it has met the criteria of a perfect. And so, all right, sir.
Potentially representing a large enterprise organization. I know a lot of people have difficulties getting Mac mini form factor into a lot of sites used for a management server. Why did you choose the Mac, and did you have any political battles that you had to win in order to get the Mac mini into your management server?
Yeah. So Sam's question was, essentially why a Mac Mini, and not necessarily just why a Mac Mini, but what hurdles did we run into in getting this to be the approved standard and actually allowing these into the data center. And that's not easy. And each time, each new data center, it is another conversation that has to be had, and there's a certain degree of pushback. At the end of the day, the cost was so much lower to have two Mac Minis in a Sonnet rack mount than even a single HP or Dell server. We're looking at a price point of, let's say, less than $2,000. I can have not only redundant power supplies, but completely redundant systems. If a system goes down, all I have to do is take it out and ship it back. So even if local IT has no concept whatsoever of even how to touch, log into, verify if the thing's booting, they just have to ship it back to us and we can ship them a new one and slap it into place, go through the process, it's provisioned, get it replicating from its partner right next to it, and now it's back online. So those were really strong selling points, even before we had all this automation in place, to leverage Mac Minis on a global scale. And like, we have had our hurdles. Specifically in some countries, we've had to have specifically grounded cords made, some interesting stuff to get into the certified protocols of different data centers. But at the end of the day, it was still cost effective, it was still worth it, and it was a platform that we believed in. Any other questions? Over there, keep going. There we go, in the shadow, sorry.
Question about your workload for automation deployment for the Mac Mini.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned using self-service, and I'm kind of curious as to why you're not just pushing the content of self-service through policies. Why the human interaction?
Okay. So this question was, with this deployment methodology and with the way that things are going, why would I use self-service as opposed to just deploying out these changes directly to these distribution points? The reason for that has a lot to do actually with the server.app, and that needs human interaction at this point. So that's one of the major reasons. When I had first started this process, the concept wasn't to actually have it be deployed at all. It was going to be run and just a shell script or something that ran every time, or an installer package or something on a system manually. Then it evolved into a deployment kind of scenario with the self-service. And really the only thing we had keeping us at that point in time is the server.app and making sure that that has gone through its initialization process, which does need a person there. And so with that, that comes the Cocoa Dialog feedback boxes of saying, we're now going to install the server app. Please agree to the end user license agreement and quit the server app, and we'll continue the installation process. So that was the reason.
When do you choose to use a DP versus a JDS?
That is a very good question, actually. So you'll notice that each one of these, I do still have distribution point in there. We do choose both. The JDS, what we use the JDS for is for policy-driven changes. So you have that HTTP share because you have the auto-resumable download functionality. Now, the distribution point where its strengths are, in our opinion, is in imaging. So if you're imaging off of a JDS, it has to download all the files to whatever OS that you are booted into for Casper imaging. It downloads all those files locally to the hard drive and then applies them to the target drive. In our imaging scenario, what we have, one, that would be not all that beneficial to NetBoot environments. That's a lot to then be downloading into the OS that you're trying to apply. But also, so what we do is we have USB sticks that are, the Casper imaging environment, Casper imaging drive, as we've branded them, and they have their own logic and make sure that they're up to date. But with that, we're not going to issue out 64 gig sticks or whatever we'd have to do to make the host OS, plus all the packages that would need to be applied to the drive. So if you have a distribution point, that's not an issue, because then you're doing a direct block copy to the destination drive, as opposed to downloading all the packages to the local drive and then to the target drive. No problem. Any other questions? Over there, up there. Yep, absolutely. So we use SUS. As I spoke to, each one of our distribution points is set up as a software update server, and we do leverage Reposado for multiple catalogs. Any other questions? Shadows? Nope. There we go.
How are you syncing those updates amongst all your Reposado servers?
Yeah, absolutely. So his question was, how am I syncing all of those updates across my Reposado servers? I have tiered. So let's say arbitrarily San Jose's, let's call it the master catalog, right? So San Jose, that's where we'd set which approved updates are available, leveraging the Margarita GUI, and then from Jesse Peterson. Then after that, let's say Santa Clara, now it needs to get its software updates. So Santa Clara then gets its software updates from San Jose directly. It doesn't go out to Apple to get those updates. Then let's bring that down even farther. Now you go out to, let's say, Vacaville, and then behind Vacaville's Dixon, and it's very tiered and spidered out so that files are never transferred more than once across network links if they don't have to be. So if the way, it's very built into the way that our network is set up over all the different WAN links, and that's how we do that. Anybody else?
First, did I just hear you say you have a server called Justin Peterson?
No, Jesse Peterson.
Oh, okay.
Jesse Peterson wrote Margarita, which is a web GUI front end to Reposado.
Okay, I had a hard time hearing on that. Can you go into a little bit more detail on Reposado? I'm not familiar with it at all.
Okay, so Reposado, that's out, Greg Neagle works on that, and that is a Python script and framework in binaries that brings down the Apple software update server catalogs and all of their files and lays them out in a way that you can now serve this off of any web server, either make it IIS or Apache normally is what we would use. Tight HTTP, whatever is your preferred flavor. But it breaks that tie of having to restrict yourself to just having Macs serve this up. So in my environment, when I had shown that one of the very first slides, it was this huge clustered environment. That's all running RHEL. So it's a huge clustered environment running Red Hat, serving out software updates over a regular web server as opposed to needing to scale outside of VMs into physical machines and Macs. All right, any other questions?
Can you talk about your JSS infrastructure, primaries, secondaries, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So my JSS infrastructure is very similar to that same exact first slide that I had shown, where, huh? Yeah, that's a long way. All right. Well, we get to see Fozzie again. That was cool. All right. There you go. All right, so with this as a graphic, just swap out, mentally swap out MySQL for NFS. So we have a MySQL server. We have 6 RHEL servers, they're VMs sitting behind a load balancer. And then there's a 7th that's off to the side. The reason why there's a 7th off to the side is that has our master role. So when you do upgrades, and there's a few other important housekeeping tasks that a master JSS has to do. And in our environment with 14,000 Macs worldwide in our JSS checking in once an hour and reconning once a day, it's pretty high availability. A lot of stress, a lot of load. So we have the ability now that should we ever need additional capacity, all we have to do is clone out another VM. But with that also, we want to make sure that that master was off to the side and not accessible over through the DMZ. because my environment is published through the DMZ. However, you are not allowed to get to the API page, log in. All that's locked down so that only computer traffic back and forth through the JSS will work.
The APIs are only on the master, or they're only on the load balancer?
I was able to make an agreement that as long as the manual as to how to use the API was taken down, I could still have the API published. So the API is enabled on all of those servers. I just have it configured so that it doesn't show the manual when you go to the JSS URL/API. If you're not familiar with it, go to it. It's really, really cool and gives you a lot of working examples of what the latest commands in the API are and how to use them. That would be what is restricted on that. All right, any other questions? Oh, where? Are we in shadows? Oh, there you go.
Real quick, are you using a physical load balancer appliance?
Yes. All right, so his question was, am I using a physical load balancer? Yes, we use big IP F5s. All right, any more questions? No? No? There we go.
Are you thinking about, instead of managing this, going to something cloud-based?
So his question was, are we thinking about, instead of managing this, going to something cloud-based instead? So there's lots of benefits in that, to go cloud-based. There's lots of cost as well, and there's lots of security paperwork you have to get through. But I absolutely preferable to me because right now, off-network, it's not ideal globally the way that my environment's configured because I only have a single, albeit a large one, similar to this, published through the DMZ. It's still published through the DMZ in one location in the world. However, if I went with something like a Rackspace or an Amazon S3 as my primary and external distribution point, then those files could be available. If you're at a coffee shop in Paris, you're going to be downloading the files from the nearest data center to your location, as opposed to coming across the pond and going all the way back to my core infrastructure. So it is definitely something that we're considering. Cost has been prohibitive, but I'm working on spinning that and convincing the right people. Because we also have an initiative to start moving out of our data centers and getting more things up in the cloud and more things virtualized. Yes, sir.
Again, your MySQL server.
Yes.
Is that a single box? Do you have that clustered? How are you managing that? And is that part of JSS server, or do you have it separate?
All right. So his question was, on my JSS environment, my MySQL server, is it in a clustered scenario? Is there more than one of them? Is it actually being hosted on one of these JSS VMs? Where is it? So it is a dedicated box, dedicated resources. We have two of them. They are not replicating redundantly. However, we do have two in place. So if one physically does go down, we are capable of restoring the entire MySQL database to that other server, which would not be high availability, but this isn't what we determine as an HA environment. My recovery time on paper is a week, 2 weeks, but really this will give me, you'll have the JSS back up in an hour should that happen. And ultimately, from my opinion, I'd rather know that that happened and that be a process so that you don't just assume that this other database is perfectly fine and replicated and all the information is there. At least for right now, I know you can do a primary slave, but there's not a lot of clustering options when leveraging the JSS at this time with MySQL.
So you're replicating into the NFS share. How are you getting the distribution points to copy
So his question was, I'm replicating, at least in this graphic, it shows that I'm replicating to the NFS share. How am I getting the files to all of the distribution points? And so in this scenario, what we're using is rsync to bring it over to that master or that admin distribution point. And also that admin that DP admin is the only one out of that cluster that's configured as a JDS, and then that's the master JDS. So then that server is what replicates out to then that hive of different distribution points. And then those distribution points, JDSs, replicate to themselves. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Are you using DP or JDS as your master, as your file master?
Yes. So his question was, am I using a JDS or a distribution point as my master? And my answer was yes. So you can configure, and I believe there is, Sam, help me on this, there is a KB on this, on how to do a DP. So there's a KB on this, and on how to have a distribution point and a JDS. Actually, right now on the Mac JDS installer, although it's not necessarily advertised, it does configure a file share for you now, if I remember correctly. It doesn't do that on the Linux installer. But in order to do that, what you need to have is a little bit more elaborate watcher script for that directory, was what I've had to come up with, to make sure that should the admin account, the Casper admin, let's say, have the Samba share mounted, then do not run inventory on the JDS side until that session is complete, just to ensure that if a file is in progress, because of the way that the JDS works, a JDS checks everything off of its MD5 hashes, and so if a file is still in transit, it would absolutely fail that MD5 hash. Therefore, you don't want the JDS to go checking whether or not that file is okay until after you're done uploading that file. So that is a caveat there. And you need to make sure that you have the JDS Casper share directory symlinked to a directory that is Casper share, and then packages is the one that you have symlinked. Because in a JDS, it doesn't have the same directory structure as a distribution point. So you need to replicate that by putting in that packages folder and then symlinking it back.
Well, to follow up, in the case of an internet-based Mac that receives a policy, what's going to be the default distribution point or JDS that's going to receive that?
Right.
Is it going to receive the JDS or is it going to receive a DP?
No. So his question is, then in this infrastructure, if you have a JDS or a client off on the internet, how is it going to receive a package? Is it going to come from a JDS? Is it going to come from a distribution point? And the answer is no. It's going to come from an HTTP share. So essentially just there's an option built into the old school distribution point framework to have an HTTP only file share. You have to still put in dummy data in order to save that as put in dummy data into the AFP or Samba configuration to allow that to be a set. And then over HTTP, the clients will download their packages. And that's how you're able to have multiple servers in a cluster. And that's not something that, at least originally, you were capable of doing with the JDS. I don't know if that's still the case now. No problem. All right. Any other questions? So we're good up there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so do you have JSS manage your master JSS?
So his question was, do I have my JSS that manages things manage my JSS? Right now, no. One, my core infrastructure is RHEL. That doesn't mean, in that last slide, I said you can get that information back up into the dashboard if you want, leveraging the API. And that's something that I am considering doing, so I can get some sort of health concept as well and have that whole infrastructure there. So there's no reason in my mind why you couldn't do that if, just out of the box, if your infrastructure was all Mac and your JSSs were Mac. I think that it would probably be pretty smart to be managing those and be able to see their health from a single pane of glass. All right, anybody else? No? Thank you very much.